It's the 90s kid show. Welcome to the 90s. 5 reasons why I loved the 90s. Reason number 4. Cartoons, anime, and the CGI, all of it was on point. Basically the kids shows and kids films even, some of them at least. But particularly the animated, there were some great cartoons from that era, from the 90s. Granted, they perhaps weren't as unique as the 80s cartoons. A lot of the 90s cartoons still held their own. I could go down a list like Eek the Cat, that was great, with a terrible thunder lizards. Angry Beavers was fairly underrated, awesome cartoon. Spider-Man, the animated series, yes, Spidey, that was great. X-Men, of course, the animated series, badass. Batman animated series, the beginning of that 90s animated hero stuff. It was like great opening, great intro, excellent writing. Arguably the most faithful depiction of the comics compared to the films that came out at the time, the older 60s television show, all of that. I mean, prior to the Dark Knight and all these, the Batman Begins and all in that particular trilogy, but animated series still very nostalgic, still good to watch. Reboot was great. Oh my god, Reboot was amazing. It was basically a CGI show, and it had its roots in Canada, because I believe it was produced in Canada, or the company that made it was based out of Canada. Great cast of characters. It was basically about these people that lived in a computer-based world. They had names like Dot Matrix, and they would battle the net. That was the big thing whenever somebody put in a game in the computer. It's kind of hard, but it's sort of like a Matrix-ish type of thing where they're all inside the computer. And they're basically pixels, and they're not pixels, but sprites. They're sprites living in the computer. Beast Wars was great. Another fun CGI. It was basically Transformers of the 90s. It was from the Transformers series, but this time they're animals. Dinobot was like a velociraptor, and there's like Rhinox, which was a rhinoceros guy, and Cheetor, who was a cheetah. It's fun stuff. Fun, very proper for like a 9-year-old, 10-year-old kid. Beast Wars was awesome. South Park, of course, started in the 90s. South Park was great. My god, Family Guy started in the 90s. Even some anime stuff was great. Sailor Moon, Ghost in the Shell, which was like one of the most influential animes of all time. Pokemon, of course, the animated series that really catapulted that damn franchise. Still is nostalgic. I know I'm rag on Pokemon now, but in the 90s, Pokemon was the shit. It really was huge. It was poppin'. Pokemon was so big, it made a cover of Time magazine at one point. That's how big that thing was. Yaiba, of course. Yaiba was great. It was basically like a Dragon Ball ripoff, but it was still fun. And then you had the live-action stuff, the live-action TV shows for kids. Stuff like The Dinosaurs, which was like a sitcom about dinosaurs. Bananas in Pajamas, fun show. Power Rangers was great. Power Rangers was fun. At least the first season or whatever, when Jason was the leader. It was great for a kid, like 93, 94. Around that time, it was a fun show. It was really mindlessly fun action. Great reruns too, and like basically carryovers from the 80s. Like in the 90s, we still got some of the 80s shows and shows that started in the 80s, and the reruns and the repeats. So as a kid, I got a chance to watch in the 90s, The Simpsons, of course, which reached its peak in the 90s as far as quality writing. You know, it didn't really start popping off until the 90s, The Simpsons. That's when it really got good. Dragon Ball, of course, the original series. That's when I was introduced to the world of Dragon Ball. Like when Goku was a kid and he was having these adventures with Bulma and Oolong and all these guys. The Adventures of Peter Pan, which was another anime. It was an anime based on the Peter Pan franchise. Really fun, kind of an underrated series too. I remember seeing that as a kid in the early 90s. Voltron was another one, another 80s show that carried in the 90s. I saw a bit of the reruns as well. Fun stuff. Dragon Ball Z, excellent. Another one that started in the, in the 80s and carried all the way throughout the 90s. It was a really action-packed, another mindless anime, just fun to watch. Kamen Rider Black, which was a late 80s live action show, which is like a Super Sentai thing, a guy in a costume, and he fights bad guys. Kind of like Power Rangers, except it's just one guy. Kamen Rider Black was good. And then Disney. The Disney stuff was great too. The Disney animated stuff. The films in particular, like Lion King was arguably the best Disney movie of all time. Saw that in the mid-90s. Tarzan, Mulan, Beauty and the Beast, man, Aladdin, the Goofy movie, Toy Story 2. Disney was popping in the 90s. They really had some great animated films, whether CG. They really, they started the CG in the mid-90s, but they also had the great 2D animation as well, and it was a golden age of Disney films. Up around the late 90s, then they sort of started to fall off a little bit, but they were like the 90s was a hotbed of great Disney franchises, and it was fun to be a kid back then, growing up on all these TV shows. And speaking of TV shows, but this definitely deserved a category on its own. Number 5. Thanks for watching. Tune in next time for reason number 5 why I loved the 90s.